Hi guys, Dino here. For all of you only interested in the soundtrack reviews, I have provided on-screen timestamps right now so you can skip straight ahead to that section of the video. The intro is a bit longer this time, simply because Tekken 3 holds a very special place in my heart, and I want to take a bit more time to talk about other aspects of this magnificent game before I take a deep dive into its music. If you're not interested in that, feel free to skip ahead, I'll see you there. 15 years have passed since the King of Iron Fist Tournament 2. After an incident with Heihachi's recently established Tekken force, the ancient fighting god Ogre is released to the world as many of the legendary fighters all across the globe start disappearing one by one. Amongst these fighters is, of course, Tekken 2's best girl, Jin Kazama, leaving behind an angsty teenage boy with concerningly high testosterone levels and equally unnatural devil powers to go with his Greek god body. Thanks, Dad. Driven by vengeance, our teenage shonen protagonist does what teenage shonen protagonists do in moments of despair. He seeks out an old geezer who just so happens to be a fighting legend himself and requests to train under him. Heihachi takes him in, of course, and what follows is a 4-year-long rocky montage of getting beat up by his diaper-wearing grandfather. Splendid! After nourishing his fighting capabilities for a while, Heihachi notices that his grandson is equally possessed by the devil as his son Kazuya, and we all know how that went. Realizing that his insatiable hunger for world dominance is, in fact, more than compatible with his familial responsibilities, he announces the King of Iron Fist Tournament 3, inviting all the remaining fighting legends, as well as a few, let's say, less experienced contestants, in an attempt to draw Ogre out of the shadows. His edgy teenage grandson, blinded by vengeance and hatred for the Green Beast, participates himself, which is of course in line with Heihachi's plans. What follows is a series of brutal fights, questionable matchups, and the classic family betrayal we've all grown to love. Thank you, Harada-san, for this beautiful display of unparalleled storytelling genius. I'm kidding, of course. I adore this game with all of its silly characters and ridiculous story bits. Tekken 3 is one of the most memorable games in my life. Some of the earliest memories of my entire childhood are playing this game in my parents' house way back when we were living in Bosnia, back when life seemed simple. Taking a deep dive into the soundtrack of this incredible PS1 classic is no small endeavor, and that's only in part due to nostalgia. This game was groundbreaking in many regards and made a massive leap forward coming from Tekken 2. Putting more emphasis on the 3D aspect with manual sidestepping, delivering new ways of fighting with your favorite character with the beat-em-up style Tekken Force and Tekken Ball modes, introducing a bunch of new characters with fresh, popular designs and a couple of secret characters that not only amp up the goofiness to unprecedented heights, but also come with more intricate ways of unlocking them. This game solidified Tekken as the 3D fighter in the industry and is one of the best-selling games on the PlayStation, only behind Gran Turismo 1 and 2 as well as Final Fantasy 7 and 8. Tekken 3, like its predecessors, is a 3D fighting game with a decently sized roster and a handful of stages where the fighting takes place. The individual tracks are usually tailored to the characters and/or the stages, in this case being the former. Like the past two games in the franchise, Tekken 3 also released on arcade machines first and only later on the PlayStation. This means that we have, yet again, two versions for almost each track in here. What's unlike the other two Tekken games is that Tekken 3 has more drastic differences between these versions, and there's no way of creating a detailed music analysis/review without either picking one of the versions while ignoring the other one, or simply covering both of them fully. I've decided to do the latter option, while keeping everything as short as concise as I can. This means I won't describe everything that goes on in each track, but rather point out the things that are unique and noteworthy. Today, we'll be listening to 26 tracks from the PS1 version, along with 19 tracks from the arcade version. The Tekken 3 OST is composed primarily by two people, Nobuyoshi Sano and Keiichi Okabe, who also participated in the creation of the Tekken 2 OST. They are credited as the main composers for this game, while the PlayStation version features a few more names credited for composing the additional tracks. The music in this game can be largely attributed to the big beat genre. Huge thanks to Musicology in her Tekken 3 music analysis video where she pointed this out. You should check that one out, link is in the description. This genre belongs to the overarching label of electronic music and combines looped drum samples and break beats with rock instrumentation, such as distorted guitars and bass guitars. Important artists from this genre include The Prodigy, Fatboy Slim, and the Chemical Brothers. Listening to these artists, you can definitely hear the similarities and influences, so if you enjoy Tekken 3's soundtrack, you might want to check some of these out. As per usual, a short disclaimer before we start. In my eyes, there are no objective parameters for quality in music. For the sake of this video, I'll attempt to provide reasonable explanations for my own judgment, but remember that this is just my opinion. Don't take it too seriously. Let's take a listen. Number 1. Opening Movie. Wow, what a title. Daring today, aren't we? The opening movie has a distinctly different goal than the other tracks. It plays when you boot up the PS1 version and is accompanied by the intro movie, so there is already more attention on the player's side should they choose not to skip the intro. I really like how the music slowly fades in, it suits the start of the movie very well. We can even hear the helicopter from the first few shots, pretty loudly even, until the music slowly takes over. Like the previous movies, this one takes some time to introduce us to the majority of the cast. The track itself mostly consists of one riff that has a rock music vibe and utilizes the minor pentatonic scale, albeit using notes in an order that creates a bit more tension. A nice first taste, since the Tekken 3 OST contains a lot more material that is very in line with this aesthetic, along with a few exceptions of course. This fits nicely with the fast pace of the movie and all the brief combat scenes we get from this intro. Overall, I get a feeling of urgency when I listen to this, which motivates me to get into the action myself. The riff is briefly interrupted by a calmer section that reduces the energy of the music and allows for the listener to calm down for a moment just before exploding into the riff again. This calm section doesn't offer that much contrast, and the bass actually continues to play the same riff throughout all of it, but the sound design and less dense instrumentation is what allows it to have less intensity. My general impression is that I do enjoy the intro movie music for what it is, an introduction to the game that gets you in the right mood and prepares you for what you can expect from Tekken 3, both in terms of gameplay and music. I don't want to say that this main riff overstays its welcome, but the track does tend to feel repetitive after a few plays, and it really feels like the music is mostly there to support the movie, not to be an independently convincing composition like Black Winter Night Sky from the Tekken 2 intro movie. The comparison might seem a bit unfair, especially since Black Winter Night Sky is, in my eyes, one of the best Tekken tunes ever made, but I can't help but draw the comparison regardless. Sue me. Still, a very nice introduction, especially when you listen to it once while booting up the game, leaving you excited for more. Number 2. Attract Movie. The arcade Attract Movie is not an actual counterpart to the intro movie of the console version. It's an entirely different piece, way shorter, and they actually kept this in for the console release, so you can listen to both depending on which movie appears. There's not much to say here. It's very brief, and again we have an ominous fade-in into a pentatonic-based guitar riff, which vanishes as quickly as it appeared. I really enjoy the feedback noises during the build-up. They add a lot of mystique to Jin and his relation to the devil and his father, making you wonder what all of this is actually about. Boy, if only we didn't find out. But that's a story for a future video. The riff is fairly basic, but it gets the job done. All in all, not my favorite, but definitely a solid little tune, and considering that you get both on the PlayStation version, it adds some nice variety to the long intro movie. Number 3 is EMBU. Yeah, this one is peculiar. I have no idea what EMBU means or what it refers to. However, this tune plays for the Other intro that you can get before entering the main menu. The movie features some of the characters performing various moves from their toolkit, starting with Hwoarang performing Taekwondo Pumse. Brings back memories. There are 3 different variations of this film, featuring the characters in different costumes or different characters altogether, performing moves that don't belong to them, which tends to look very goofy at times. The music itself is weird though. Since there is only an arcade version of this track, the music has less fidelity, meaning it sounds like it's of lower quality. Coming from the arcade version aside though, this tune sounds even worse in that regard. The sounds are very sharp and penetrating, especially the drums. In terms of composition, the track doesn't really offer a steady beat to hold on to. Well, sometimes it does, but there are many moments where the track breaks out of its regular groove, seemingly so it can keep up with the cuts of the movie. Actually, I can't even tell if the music is made to sync up with the movie or the other way around, and they're not even that well in sync. It really makes me wonder how this came to be and why they didn't put a bit more effort into making this smoother. Regardless of my criticisms, the track does have some quality of creating suspension and making you watch the movements of the characters in awe. There is some tension here, like something crazy could happen at any point in the movie, and the music does a great part in that. I would never put this on to listen to it, but in the context of the EMBUs, it works decently. If I could choose, I'd still try to make the rhythm a bit more intuitive and less over the place though. Number 4 is the character select music. The PlayStation version of this track is fairly simple. We have another mostly pentatonic bass riff, played by the bass while a lot of different guitar sounds are thrown in and out of the track, creating a lot of turbulence, almost making me a bit nervous, trying to decide on a character while the clock is running down. In that regard, the track excels. It fits the in-game purpose and has an overall pleasant sound design. What I don't enjoy in this one is the rhythmic changes around the middle. The tune breaks out of the previously established groove and seems to, well, restart again and again after just a few measures, making it sound like a bunch of hiccups. I understand that Sana was going for some rhythmic displacement to keep the track interesting, but I think this backfired big time. It just feels weird to listen to. If you don't take over 40 seconds to choose your character, you won't hear this anyway, but I still find it odd. Maybe that was a popular thing to do in 90s electronic or big beat music, I'm not sure. Anyway, these short interruptions aside, I like this track. It goes for a completely different vibe than the Tekken 2 character select, but I like that we get something fresh to change things up. The arcade tune has a slightly different riff as its basis, but the feeling I get from both versions is very similar, dare I say identical. I suppose that means the transition from arcade to PS1 was successful in a way. This version has a vastly different mix. The guitar sounds like it's somewhere way behind the other instruments, and the synth sounds that pop in and out of the sound space are very dominant in the grand scheme of things. I still really enjoy the arcade version, especially the guitar riff together with the bass guitar. I'm almost inclined to say that I actually prefer the arcade version, even though I find that the PlayStation version has a more balanced sound overall. Good stuff. Number 5, Jin Kazama. The poster boy of the franchise and literal face of this game obviously needs an iconic track to go along, and boy is this track iconic. We have a catchy guitar riff that fills up most of the playtime. There are short sections where the guitar takes a break and the synth sounds fill up the space that opens up because of it. While these sections offer a bit of a different feeling and allow for the iconic riff to build up again, I do have to say that this lacks variety to me. This change of intensity just isn't enough to keep me interested for long. Yes, the riff is cool and very memorable. So memorable in fact that I always imagined playing it on a guitar as a kid, even before I had actually started to learn the guitar. But there are only so many repetitions of the same riff with the same drumming and the same bass groove that I can endure until something becomes boring. And while this tune is fun for like 20 seconds, it grows old rather quickly. The arcade version for Jin's track is pretty similar to the arranged one, aside the overall quality and mix of course. The drums sound very weak, as does the bass, a shame really. What I do prefer here, however, is the little interludes between the main riff sections. They offer a brief change of mood and some harmonic movement, while both those aspects fall a bit short in the arranged version. This is emphasized during the bridge in the middle of the track, where the music takes a huge step back to build itself up again. I really enjoy these moments, so I would say that I prefer this version over the arranged one, even if the overall sound and mixing could be better for today's listening equipment. The track is just too iconic, and paired with the added variety of the arcade version, it's really cool to listen to. I also think that it goes really nicely with Jin's aesthetic in this game. He's a strong, ambitious teenage boy who very evidently tries to appear cool, and the catchy guitar riff somehow feels like a perfect match for his flame pants. Number 6, Lei Wulong. This is one of the tunes with the biggest differences between the versions. Let's cover the arcade version first this time. Once again, we have a rocky, somewhat funky guitar serving as the main motive of the piece, which is presented immediately at the start. Overall, the track is very dense and very busy. The main riff carries us forward, while a lot of different synth sounds happen around it. Sometimes these sounds add a lot of flair, and sometimes they get flat out annoying. In the latter half, the synth sounds take over the spotlight while the main riff moves to the background. This changes the feeling of the tune drastically at some points, for better or for worse. I would actually say for better, since I like variety within a track, but I can see how this could be off-putting to some of you. The arranged version does contain the same riff, but it takes more than a whole minute until we can hear it for the first time. Frankly, I think this is way too long in the context of the game. I am aware that the game sometimes starts the track not at the beginning but anywhere in the middle, but I think I'd rather have a short, concise introduction to the track that I can listen to every single time. Even then, the riff is not repeated over and over again like in the arcade version, but rather appears once or twice before disappearing as quickly as it entered the stage. The synth melodies appear to have much more importance in this version, as they take the spotlight for almost all of the remaining track. Honestly, I'm torn on Lei's tune. I enjoy the straightforwardness of the arcade version, and I like the guitar riff a lot, so I don't mind how frequently it appears in that version. However, the use of the synth sounds tends to get annoying there. The arranged version offers a more, well, I guess well-rounded experience, and the latter half of it is especially enjoyable to me, while the intro is a tad bit long and doesn't offer as much musical substance. I'd say in the context of the game I might prefer the arcade version, while I'd probably prefer the PlayStation version for a slightly more interesting listening experience. Number 7, King. The arranged version of King's tune is very interesting. It has a very calm intro that takes about 35 seconds to move into the actual main riff of the track. The riff itself is in Phrygian, so it has a more tense, somewhat harsher sound quality than the other riffs so far. After a rather tedious amount of repetitions of this riff, we move into a section that is focused on a steady bass groove and some synth sounds adding more rhythmic variety. Occasionally we can hear a short guitar lick that is somehow really nostalgic to me, even though it doesn't appear that often. After a few more repetitions of the riff that I'm already getting tired of, we get an even calmer section that completely changes the intensity of the track. This frequent shift in atmosphere really makes King's tune stand out to me. I gotta say, I favor the calmer sections way more than the aggressive riff, and I'm kind of disappointed I can't just listen to these parts without having to go through minutes of this. But I suppose this ambivalence resembles the unique presentation of King as a character. He's more down to earth than some of the supernatural creatures in the franchise, but he's still peculiar and almost frightening at times with his mask, the tail, and seeming lack of proper speech. The stage, which seems to be a wrestling ring atop of a cold mountain, adds even more to this unique flavor. Now for the arcade version. Remember the little melody I mentioned before? Yeah, so this version immediately starts with this section. No wonder I remember it so well. This take on the King OST has a much clearer direction without any drastic changes of atmosphere. The intensity does increase and decrease at points, but this calm, somehow cozy but also slightly anxious vibe is always present, and I'm all here for it. The Phrygian riff with the sawtooth sound is nowhere to be heard here, and honestly I don't think the track loses anything for it. I mean, this is the original version after all, so I suppose I should say the PlayStation version doesn't really gain anything from it, but yeah, you know what I mean. Back to the topic. The one downside is that the drums sound really bad, but that's a price you gotta pay sometimes. Regardless, I much prefer the arcade version for King and his aesthetic in Tekken 3. It's a truly unique tune for the franchise, and I'm glad I gave it a few detailed listens after all these years. Brilliant. Number 8. Paul Pheonix. The first thing I notice about the PS1 version is the intro and how odd the accentuation sounds. At first, the guitar is all alone and presents a riff that honestly gives me trouble figuring out where the measure starts and where it ends. Like seriously, where is the 1 in here? Can you figure it out on the first listen? The music degree might have been a waste of time after all. Anyway, to make things even more complicated, the drums build up shortly before the song opens up completely, and the few ride hits that we get from the drums seem to be syncopated. So not only do they not help with rhythmic orientation, they make an attempt to confuse me even further. Nice try, Sano, but I know how to count to 4. I think I understand what the composer was going for here, but I'd be lying if I said that it pays off. I think I'd rather know where we are rhythmically, thanks. The overall track is a lot darker in nature. It's probably a combination of the guitar sound, the note choices in the riff, along with the lack of calmer parts. I like the vibe, even though the track seems a bit too repetitive for my liking. Around the middle, the track does cool down a bit, pulling the guitar back and putting more emphasis on some synth sounds that establish some harmonic ideas that do add variety. I like variety. This is the stuff I really enjoy. I wish we'd get more of that, and earlier, but maybe it wouldn't feel as impactful then, who knows. The arcade version contains a lot of the elements that are still present in the arranged one. The vibe is very similar, although it feels a bit slower and more composed. The calmer parts do appear a bit more frequently in the arcade version, which I do favor, but I can't help but feel a bit bored listening to this one. Somehow the energy is just not there, it's not as hype as the arranged version. Overall, the PS1 arrangement just feels more convincing. It has the energy to match Paul's character, a pairing I enjoy a lot more over his Tekken 2 track. By the way, if you haven't seen the Tekken 2 Is the Music Good, go check it out. Link will be somewhere on the screen right now. A man in his mid-40s stepping once again into the ring to finally prove his dominance, having been denied the opportunity many years ago. His bike rock outfit is a nice fit for Tekken 3's OST approach in general, and the more I listen to this tune, the more it starts growing on me. Next up is a newcomer to the series, Eddy Gordo. A friend of mine recently told me about his former capoeira teacher and that he was saying how much Eddy's introduction in Tekken 3 helped popularize the sport. It's so heartwarming to hear how much a beloved video game character can impact people in real life and motivate them to pursue a hobby, especially if it's one that will help with their athleticism and vitality. Regarding his music, what we got here is a very funky tune in a medium tempo. The guitars give it a very relaxing feeling, especially since the strumming is played rather softly, while the drums and bass provide a steady groove that matches Eddy's acrobatic moves in the game. One thing I need to criticize are the electronic sounds that constantly float around the other instruments. I feel overwhelmed rather quickly on every listen, and I believe this piece would have gained a lot from a more reserved instrumentation. This is not a major issue for me, but I do think I would have much preferred it that way. Once again, the original version is quite different from the arranged one. In the arcade soundtrack, we don't have any funky guitars or bass, but rather more of a rock sound that is very reminiscent of Jin's OST to me. What the two versions have in common is the unnecessary amount of electronic sounds filling up any empty space in the mix. I'm tempted to say the arcade version is even worse in that regard. The main riff from the guitar is one of the better ones in my opinion, but it's not enough to make the track likable to me, and it also doesn't suit Eddy in my opinion. I'll take the PS1 version over this one every day of the week. Number 10, Hwoarang. Being another fresh entry to the series, Hwoarang might be one of the most popular quote-unquote redesigns in the entire Tekken franchise. They knew his design is phenomenal, heck they even made him the first character you see during the EMBU cinematic, and that was a good decision. With Hwoarang, both versions of the OST are rather similar, a funky, energetic soundtrack that doesn't stop for a single second, just like the average Hwoarang player, am I right? The arcade version does sound significantly worse overall, although I gotta say I'm not the biggest fan of the arranged mix either. The guitar is a bit quiet there. The two versions do have some differences. The PS1 track has the main riff modulate to a higher key after a few repetitions, which avoids the issue of monotony that some of the other tracks were guilty of. The arcade version solves this slightly differently by having the bass move around a bit more during the main riff and imply a few more chord changes. I like some harmonic development in these tunes, so I do favor the sound of the arcade version in this regard. The PS1 version also includes a middle section that offers a less intense musical moment, allowing the track to cool down for a bit. This is a nice detail if you listen to the whole tune, but frankly I don't miss this part when I listen to the arcade version. Overall, I just enjoy it a bit more than the PS1 arrangement. Not by a huge amount, but if I had to choose, it would definitely be the arcade version. Number 11, Forest Law. Let's be real, how many of you actually knew that this was not the same character from the first two games? I don't think I knew as a kid. Like, you can see both of them in the intro movie, and I also believe in some of the endings, but still. Was I the only one? Anyway, Law's arranged OST is not particularly my favorite. I feel like it really depends on my mood as to how much I can enjoy it. Last night I couldn't stand listening to it, and now I think it's quite alright. The intro takes a bit too long to get going in my opinion, but I really like this riff that's partially taken from the arcade version. Crazy good, right? Also, the middle section with the synth strings is quite nice, especially when that guitar riff starts to fade in again. So, a nice little main riff and a solid second half, but a bit slower at the start, which is probably the more important section for a fighting game song. I really wish they had included the whole original riff from the arcade version. You know, this one. Not sure why they didn't, it would have really fit the arrangement in my opinion, but what can you do? Luckily, the arcade version starts off with one of the most iconic riffs in this game's OST, in my opinion anyway. This version just instantly grabs my attention and doesn't let go for a good while. The energy of this track is kinda weird. It's not exactly relaxing, but it is slower than most of the other tracks so far and has something soothing about it. I do enjoy the pairing with Forest Law, as he has something relaxed about his appearance in this game. Yes, he is the son of a former participant and has yet to prove himself, but somehow I feel like this suits the carefree ambience of the soundtrack. He's confident, but doesn't need to try too hard, just like the music. They could have gone for fewer synth sounds during some sections, but it fits with the other tracks, albeit not something I particularly enjoy myself. Regardless, I really enjoy this one, and the difference between the versions is probably the biggest so far. Number 12, Nina Williams. Finally, Nina's OST. This might be the best track in the whole game for me, hands down. It is another one with rather few differences between the two iterations. Yes, there are always small changes, but it feels like both versions try to achieve the same thing. Create a James Bond kind of atmosphere, a slow track that has a dark, intriguing vibe. Both versions start off with what's possibly the best bass riff I've heard in a video game soundtrack, period. Just listen to this. The arcade version does have a few sections that get a bit too harsh in their sound design for my liking, and I'm already heavily biased towards the arranged version since, you know, it's actually one of my all-time favorite Tekken tunes. It feels like everything about this track is perfectly timed, perfectly balanced. I can't find anything to criticize here. I love the unique atmosphere it creates, which perfectly fits to a silent assassin like Nina, and her dark stage amplifies this even further. Honestly, I wish we'd get a few more tracks like this one. Tracks that don't follow the same big beat formula. Don't get me wrong, it's a good formula that produced some amazing tracks, but I enjoy variety, and Nina's OST delivers. Number 13. Yoshimitsu. As soon as the first notes of the PS1 version hit my eardrums, my mind instantly drew a conclusion. This does not fit Yoshimitsu. Like, at all? Am I the only one thinking this? Do you honestly see Yoshimitsu and his crazy design when you hear this? Tell me in the comments, maybe it's just me. The arcade version contains the same main riff, but the way the other sounds are utilized creates a slightly more unnerving, mystical vibe that is heavily needed to portray Yoshimitsu's character properly. The synth melody at the start adds a ton of flavor and is also very nostalgic for me, and I really wish we had gotten that in the PS1 arrangement. On top of that, we get a much calmer section around the middle that fits Yoshi's forest stage really nicely. Somehow it feels both familiar and alien, so exactly like this guy. I think it's clear that I favor the arcade version. It just sounds way more like Yoshimitsu to me, and I actually get enjoyment out of listening to it. Which one do you prefer? Are there actual fans of the arranged versions out there? Tell me in the comments. Number 14. Ling Xiaoyu. I never really got around to liking Xiaoyu's design, not as a kid, not as an adult. This is one of the blander Tekken 3 characters for me, and sadly the music reflects this appearance. The opening riff is, well, like many of the others. A rocky, pentatonic-based guitar riff that doesn't really do much harmonically, it's just being looped over and over again. The calmer section following it is also nothing out of the ordinary. Around the middle, as often is with Tekken soundtracks, we finally get some variety, but in this instance I feel like it is way too late. If I didn't listen to this track to analyze it, I might have not even made it this far. It's not like any of the sounds are bothering me, but none of them feel convincing. I don't feel anything really when I listen to this, and that's probably the worst criticism you can receive for a piece of music. From me anyway. The arcade version opens with a very brief, funny segment before switching into the actual track. I like this detail as it works well with Xiaoyu's easygoing character and her hilarious ending movie. It really sounds like encountering this rather short high school girl and thinking nothing of it until the moment you realize that she's about to kick your ass. Good stuff. Overall, the arcade version is a bit more relaxed, which I do prefer in this instance. I feel like I hear more of Xiaoyu in here, while the arranged version might as well have been the OST for Paul or Law. Still not my favorite, but nice to listen to. Number 15. Heihachi Mishima. Heihachi's PS1 OST is rather laid back. To me, it sounds like a soundtrack in a heist movie where our protagonist goes through a montage of gathering all of the crew members for the upcoming mission. Looking at the story for Tekken 3, I suppose this fits surprisingly well. Heihachi is after Ogre and his powers, as he utilizes the King of Iron Fist tournament to lure and capture this ancient fighting god. Using his teenage grandson as bait is a classic Mishima move, although not necessarily typical for the heist movie genre. I'm a bit torn on this track. I like it in isolation, as it has a sense of urgency, but not in a threatening way. I mean, you are fighting the sub-boss to this music, so I feel like a certain amount of threat would help in conveying the seriousness of this encounter. For instance, I really enjoyed the dark and melancholic aspect of Kazuya's Tekken 2 soundtrack, as it really fit well with Tekken 2's overall vibe and also made the sub-boss fight feel important and impactful. I don't really get this notion here, which is fine, since Tekken 3 has a generally different atmosphere than its predecessor. However, I can't help but feel a little bit disappointed with this tune. Not because I dislike it, but because I'd have hoped for something else in the context of this sub-boss fight. The arcade version reminds me of Jin's track to some degree, which would make sense for the two Mishimas in this game. Sadly, it also doesn't give off any boss fight vibes, instead feeling even less tense and dramatic than the arranged version. The intensity does pick up around the middle, but honestly it's just not what I'd like to hear when fighting this menace of a human being. Maybe my expectation is just out of place, but I really can't find any reason to return to this track anytime soon. Number 16, Julia Chang. This is probably the first piece where I'm glad about the long intro. It takes almost a minute for the guitar to kick in, but I really enjoy the beat up until that point. Somehow, instead of boring me, it makes me curious to see what's about to come, which is exactly what a build-up should do. The section where the guitar stops for a while is my least favorite. It's still alright, and I enjoy the more minimalistic drums in this portion of Julia's song, but I wish it was a little bit shorter, since I'm really fond of the guitar riff in this tune. It's very nostalgic to me, and I've been listening to this occasionally over many years. Funny thing is, I always thought that this track belonged to Bryan. Ironically, I think the track suits Julia very nicely, as it sounds ambitious and determined, but also youthfully adventurous, almost in a naive way. I can vibe with that. Oddly enough, Julia's involvement in the Tekken 3 story is actually quite substantial. Let's take a short moment to talk about the Chang pendant. Before the events of the first Tekken game, Heihachi had a Hong Kong employee, Mr. Chang, search the Native American lands for a certain treasure. After finding this treasure, he deemed it too dangerous to give to a power-hungry man such as Heihachi Mishima, and instead gave it to his Native American wife for safekeeping. Upon losing this ancient pendant, Heihachi had Mr. Chang killed, sparking the vengeful motivation for his daughter Michelle to participate in the first King of Iron Fist tournament. After taking over the Mishima Zaibatsu, Kazuya learns of the alleged powers of the pendant that Michelle wears around her neck now. Being the sleek, purple-suited businessman we've all grown to adore, he kidnaps Michelle's mother, forcing her to participate in the tournament in hopes of stealing the pendant. You know who else wants to steal the pendant? Kunimitsu, during the events of the first game. Crazy how seemingly random characters are connected in this franchise. Anyway, I really hadn't realized that awakening Ogre with this treasure was a side plot from the very start of the Tekken story. That's honestly kinda cool. What a shame how this franchise's lore started to deteriorate years later, but we'll get to that in future videos. Depending on the source, or rather depending on which article you read from the same wiki, mind you, Michelle either sought out Heihachi to confront him about his interest in the pendant, or went somewhere else to learn about its secrets and got kidnapped by Heihachi in the process, forcing Julia, her adoptive daughter, to confront him about the pendant and return it home. Regardless of the details, it seems that Heihachi uses the pendant during the events of Tekken 3 in an attempt to control Ogre and its powers, which doesn't really work out in the end, as we know that Jin's ending is canon. In Julia's ending, though, she returns home with the pendant and is reunited with her mother, who does some exposition on its powers, but as we know, Tekken endings can have varying degrees of involvement in the actual, canonically correct story.
I'll never let Heihachi get away with this.
No, Julia, wait. Julia, hatred is not the answer.
So, Julia did not have a unique soundtrack in the first iteration of the game. However, the hidden characters, aka the ones you could unlock, all shared the same song called Hidden Characters. Maybe that's why I associated Bryan with this music. The funny thing about this is that Julia's track is the arranged counterpart of this tune, and since I really love the Hidden Characters theme, she got very lucky there. The arcade version is differently arranged, obviously, starting off with the one guitar riff that I like so much. The build-up in this iteration consists of the guitar riff and this very catchy synth melody trading the spotlights until the drums kick in eventually. After a couple of minutes, we get another drop into a more energetic section, ditching the guitar riff and introducing more synth melodies floating around. Unlike with some of the other tracks, I like the density of these sounds in Julia's OST. They are balanced quite well with the remaining instrumentation and just fit the vibe very well. No doubt this is one of my favorite Tekken tunes of all time. Julia's arranged theme is also really good, but this arcade track is on another level and, ironically, suits her even better than her PS1 tune. Number 18, Kuma and Panda. From here on out, we will no longer have arcade versions for the characters' songs to compare, since these were all hidden characters sharing the previous theme. Panda is a new addition to the roster in Tekken 3, albeit just as a palette swap for Kuma, so they also share the same soundtrack. This is the first and last time that we can hear an acoustic guitar in the entire OST, which feels bittersweet. It helps with the soothing atmosphere of the intro, even though it's a bit quiet in the mix. A few moments later, we can hear an electric guitar play some funk, which suits the steady groove of the song well. This piece strikes a pretty nice balance in its instrumentation. At no point do I feel overwhelmed by any of the sounds. The back and forth between the acoustic guitar part and the heavier hitting sections is pleasant to hear. I'm almost surprised how much I enjoy this, considering that this is one of the tracks I have absolutely zero memory of. The one downside I would mention is that I can't find anything too memorable in here. I enjoy this tune when I put it on, but it doesn't leave me craving more once it's over. Taking this into account, it's a decent track. Number 19 is Gunjack. Why didn't they name him Jack 3? Anyway, Gunjack has a rather unique theme, as it's less based on rock guitar riffs, but lays a bit more focus on a very harsh, metallic sound. This is achieved by utilizing a lot of different electronic sounds layered on top of each other and filling the whole soundscape. Since the tune has a good reason to go for such an aesthetic, I'm not bothered by the strong presence of these sounds. They actually sell me on the idea of this huge robotic fighter and this being his background music. The drums also sound distinctly different here, as they seem to be very compressed and almost sound like every part of the drum kit is over-modulating. This gives every single hit a very harsh timbre, and while it feels a bit much at times, it does go well with the overall sound design. When I put this tune on, I can imagine how it would feel to enter the tournament and face off against this menacing opponent, simply standing in front of me and staring directly at my soul with his cold, dead eyes. Of course I know that Jack has a sense of empathy and is not just a mindless slaughter machine, and I feel that this theme reflects that wonderfully, as the music has a generally peaceful vibe, while the electronic sounds add an uneasy layer to it. Like, this huge robot does not want to crush you with his bare hands, but he could. Easily. And you know that. Really nice. Number 20, Bryan Fury. Next up is my favorite Tekken character, period. Bryan is just batshit insane. An ex-cop cyborg with the most frightening laugh to ever hit my eardrums. Something about this character is just fascinating. There isn't really much depth to his character, and that also doesn't really change over the future iterations of the series, but I can't help but feel attached to his design. Just look at it. His theme starts off with some very hectic drumming, while some electronic sounds slowly fade into the spotlight. The following synth melodies and chords lay the groundwork for most of this track, and also deliver on the robotic vibe, appropriate for a cyborg. These sections are interrupted by a part that contains a very fast bass guitar shredding away. Sadly, I don't really get this part, as it doesn't really seem to fit, musically speaking. Yes, the drums are overall hectic, but this frenzy of percussive sound is balanced nicely with the much slower synth sounds, and the bass taking over like that just feels a little out of place. All in all, Bryan's theme is a bit more demanding, as it has more complex harmonic movements and a good variety of differently paced sections. This results in his theme being a cool piece to listen to carefully, extracting interesting ideas from it, but I imagine it wouldn't fare that well as mindless background music during gaming or something similar. Ultimately, it comes down to its original context within the game, and I think that his track works great in that regard. Good stuff. Number 21, Mokujin. Personally, I was in the camp of people who hoped they'd introduce Mokujin in one of the later Tekken 7 seasons. I know it would have been difficult to justify a $5 price tag for a character that copies the moveset of a different character each fight, thus rendering him practically unusable in competitive play, but I mean they could have added him as a free bonus, you know, to give back to the fans. I also really like his design and the goofiness he adds to every game they chose to include him in. Rest in peace, our little tree friend. Mokujin's unique gameplay mechanic is actually reflected within his music in Tekken 3. There is a fundamental set of sounds that make up most of this tune's playtime, consisting of a typical drum kit and some wooden sounds. It's probably a xylophone or some wood blocks, like Musicology pointed out in her video. On top of this, little bits and pieces of the other characters' OSTs are carefully placed in the mix. These are small details that you barely notice while playing the game, but you are rewarded if you do choose to listen more carefully, which I always appreciate. They didn't need to include this multifaceted aspect to Mokujin's theme, but still went the extra mile to do so. Gotta respect that. While I wouldn't choose this for casual listening, I think this works perfect for Mokujin as a character. This one is really well made. Number 22, Dr. Bosconovitch. Dr. B is the first character in the franchise that requires a separate game mode to unlock. It's fairly straightforward. You play the Tekken Force mode with any character you like and finish all 4 stages including the boss characters. Upon doing this, you're rewarded with a bronze key. You need to repeat this 2 more times to get the other 2 keys, and then finish the mode a 4th and final time. This time, after defeating Heihachi or Jin as the boss of the final stage, you face Dr. B as an additional opponent in his lab where you need to beat him. None of this is groundbreaking really, but from a franchise that hasn't done this before, in a genre where secret characters are usually unlocked by doing very specific, obscure stuff in the arcade mode or completing arbitrary grinding tasks, it is a very cool element. I certainly enjoyed playing Tekken Force as a kid, and seeing the keys pop up motivated me to play them even more. What a cool way to market your new game mode. Also, did I mention how ridiculous his moveset is? Facing off against Dr. Bosconovitch in his lab is the first time you hear his theme. Sadly, his theme is nothing special. It does sound decent, sure, but nothing really memorable and nothing to signify the unique way of unlocking this character. I'm a little disappointed in Dr. B's OST, not because it is worse than any of the other tracks, but because I hoped for a bit more given his specific role in the game. Number 23, Anna Williams. Compared to all the previous tracks, this theme is more on the subtle side. As subtle as a track can be with such busy drumming anyway. This piece sounds like it's always building up to something with a very flat tension curve. I don't mean this negatively at all, in fact I appreciate this change of pace. It serves as a nice contrast to more busy tracks in this game. Other than that, there's nothing really noteworthy for me here. The drumming is indeed busy, but never overdone. The synth sounds on top are more on the slower side, which works surprisingly well, but none of the melodies or grooves stick out as especially memorable. It's nice as a background track, but not much more for me. Number 24. Tiger Jackson. So, Tekken 3 has a nice set of unlockable rewards beyond the hidden characters. If you fulfill certain criteria in-game, you can unlock alternate costumes for some of the fighters. Eddy, being the second or at least the third poster boy of this game, has a rather unique alternate costume. Once you beat the arcade mode with 16 different characters, you can select his third costume and play as the disco enthusiast Tiger Jackson. His theme disappointingly doesn't resemble anything that I would recognize as disco. It's more of the same big beat stuff, really. I really don't have much to say here. The track is not bad by any margin, but I feel no need to listen to it beyond my research for this video. I really like Tiger's design though. Number 25. Gon. Gon might be the weirdest addition to this franchise, period. Not necessarily due to his design, no, we've seen more ridiculous designs over the years, that's for sure. Also because of his mechanical properties in the game. Due to his very short height, he basically dodges all high hits by default, which is certainly breaking the rules of Tekken. I remember hearing about him even being banned in tournaments back then, although I don't know if that is really true. The people over on That Blasted Salami recently held a Tekken 3 tournament with some known pro players from Europe, and they allowed his use there. If you want to see some competent and really funny Gon gameplay, be sure to check it out, link is in the description. I remember being borderline obsessed with this character. Something about this tiny yellow dinosaur just clicked with me. I remember playing Tekken Tag tournaments as a prepubescent kid and searching the whole freaking web for any hints on how to unlock Gon. There were many rumors and troll posts floating around claiming that if you were to get a perfect score in the Tekken Bowl mode, you would finally unlock Gon, the one missing character from the franchise. Even back then I had a feeling that people were lying, but I wanted it to be true so bad. What a shame he never returned. Alright, let's talk about the actual music. Sadly, I feel rather indifferent about his theme. There's nothing in here that resembles such a goofy secret character, nor the unique game mode that is played to unlock him. It's just another Tekken 3 song, and not a crazy unique one, sadly. I mean, if you happen to really enjoy the riff in this song, you might like it, as you'll be listening to it for almost the whole duration, but it just doesn't click for me. What a shame, they could have used this opportunity for some really funny stuff, musically speaking, but they didn't. Oh well. Number 26. Ogre. Final boss, final track. A fitting end for the character theme segment, as I think that Ogre's track is unique, fitting and overall just nice to listen to. Let's talk about the arcade version first. The build-up at the start is especially beautiful. We have some very minimal drumming, providing just enough elements to keep a steady pulse going. The piano notes and guitar feedback noises fly around and create a very nice feeling of being lost. Particularly looking at this monstrosity of an opponent and staring in awe as you try to fathom what sort of life form is seconds away from tearing you to pieces. The track does ramp up its intensity, and it's almost for the worse in my opinion. I'd rather have the calm but creepy vibe continue throughout all of the fight. Ogre is a fright-inducing alien creature after all. The arranged version is an upgrade from the arcade original, in my opinion anyway. The build-up takes more time, but feels more intense as the feedback noises and other electronic sounds fade in and out more aggressively this time. This really sells me even more on the vibe I get from Ogre's design. Since this version never breaks out into a more rock-based segment, it always keeps this high level of tension. When I listen to this and imagine facing Ogre in hand-to-hand combat, I feel terrified, which is amazing. In this iteration, True Ogre has a slightly different arrangement. There are a few more synth sounds from the get-go, and the track is a bit denser overall. It doesn't really change the vibe of the track, even though I like the subtle, almost more nuanced approach of the former. Maybe it's also because I prefer the ancient Ogre design, as I find it much more menacing looking. All in all, I really appreciate the different approach they took for the final boss music. This is more in line of what I had expected for Heihachi's track. Giving the important fights more unique soundtracks is just something that feels important to me. Great stuff. Number 27. Result. The PlayStation version includes a few additional soundtracks, similarly to the previous Tekken games. What we just heard is part of the Result theme, playing whenever you finish a mode in the game and get presented with the results. This piece is nothing spectacular, a bit more reserved than a lot of the other tracks, so I guess it fits the in-game purpose, but nothing all too memorable in here sadly. On to the next one. Number 28, Continue. Honestly, this might be one of my least favorite pieces of the whole OST. I think this one is arcade exclusive, as I haven't been able to find any arranged counterpart. The Continue theme is groovy, and on its own not a bad listen. Maybe a tad bit repetitive, but that's not the greatest sin you can commit. What I really don't understand on an emotional basis is why this kind of music would be selected for the Continue screen. In my mind, the Continue screen is supposed to humiliate you a little for losing, while also encouraging you to pick yourself up again and win next time. This track feels like neither of these things. I know, the Continue music doesn't matter all that much, as you can skip it immediately, and depending on how good you are, you might have not even heard this tune often. But still, this one is really not for me. Number 29, Game Over. The Game Over sound is like 5 seconds long, so really not much to talk about. I like its choice, and it sells me on its defeating nature. Well done. Number 30, Staff Roll. The arranged version of the Staff Roll theme is surprisingly intense and dark. Frankly, I'm almost disappointed that this wasn't utilized as music for a character. It's a pretty nice track. It's very in line with the overall Tekken 3 soundtrack, so it makes sense to use it as the closing tune. It's just that its high energy doesn't feel like something is being finished, rather that it's just beginning. One remarkable aspect of this tune is the outro. The way it starts to decline in intensity is a really cool way to announce the end of the piece. The arcade version is much more, let's say, down to earth. It's slower, shorter, and more minimalist in its arrangement. What's really cool about this tune is that they integrated seemingly every other arcade track in it. You'll find very obvious parts from Jin's, Nina's, Lei's, and many others OSTs. Really clever way to round things off. Between the two versions, I'm not sure which one I prefer. They are so fundamentally different that a comparison is nigh impossible. I guess I prefer the arcade version simply for the familiarity of the small bits from the other tracks, as well as the slower overall energy. I just think it suits the purpose of this tune a little bit better. Let's get to the verdict. Is Tekken 3's music good? Yes, it's pretty darn good. The whole thing follows a consistent tone and style, which is not easy to pull off. If you like the big beat style or similar genres, you will have a blast listening to this game's OST. If you're not that much into this overall sound, like me, there are still plenty of creative, original compositions and arrangements to explore. My favorite choices include Nina's arranged theme for its crazy unique sound within this game and how well it matches her personality, King's arcade track for its uniquely calm sound design and beautiful stage pairing to go along, and Julia's arcade, aka Hidden Characters theme, which also has a crazy good arranged version to go along. A lot of the other pieces are still very memorable and a nice listen, like Jin's and Hwoarang's immensely iconic arcade themes. Eddy's incredibly original tune goes amazingly well with his unique design and moveset, and Ogre's music gives every arcade playthrough of Tekken 3 the climactic finale it deserves. Truly a lot of amazing music in here. I do have to compare it to the previous entry, right? It just feels wrong not to do it, doesn't it? I have to admit, even with a huge nostalgia bonus, I can't say that I prefer Tekken 3's music over the Tekken 2 OST. Tekken 2 had some tracks that truly stand out, like the intro piece Black Winter Night Sky, Emotionless Passion for Kazuya, or Ring a Bell for King. I truly enjoyed this amount of variety, so going into Tekken 3's more streamlined musical experience, I'm left a little bit disappointed. But that's mostly just a question of whether you like the big beat style, as Tekken 3 does commit to this aesthetic fully and wholeheartedly, which I can respect. Regardless, Tekken 3 contains some of the most iconic themes of the franchise and some of my personal favorites. On top of that, it certainly aided greatly in popularizing this game, and if your video game soundtrack can achieve any of that, you've already won. If you're still watching at this point, thank you so much. I had a lot of fun covering what's probably the most nostalgic game for me, period. So much that I'm thinking about actually doing a few videos that are not necessarily music related on this game. Would you be interested in that, or would you rather see more in-depth soundtrack reviews like this one on the channel? Please tell me in the comments. If you want to check out my favorite songs from this game, I've created a Spotify playlist again, link is down in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like on it, it helps me grow the channel immensely. The next Is a Music Good will cover a different franchise again, but fear not, as Tekken Tag Tournament is coming soon. If these videos end up doing well, I might even cover the whole damn franchise before Tekken 8 drops. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of it. Again, thank you so much for watching, I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.